Hey everybody, welcome to episode 2 of our Reach1 Podcast, and I'm Jeremy, I'm one of the pastors here, and
I'm Dale, one of the pastors here too.
Yeah, here. How you doing today?
Good.
So it's a nice cold, in case you're listening to this maybe a year's down the road. I was thinking
It'll
all these
probably
guys
stay alive for years,
right,
I'm sure.
So all these guys that have these long-running podcasts, right? I think back to, they had to have had like episode number 2. They didn't know what they were up against or where it was going, and so I think that's kind of cool to think about. They all had that starting point of episode, but it's cold, like -20 cold.
Yeah, the high today is supposed to be -7, 6,
something like that. Yeah. So
when the high is a negative number, that's miserable.
Dude, it made me want to put out there that we were establishing a search committee for a Northfield South campus, like in Key West.
Yeah, I could say.
I was going to volunteer to set
Des Moines
that up.
and Kansas City is not good enough right
south.
now.
Well, even I think San Antonio, the high today was in the low 20s, which is crazy.
Does that ever happen there?
I don't know. Not in the time that my family's lived down there. I haven't really heard them think about that, but... So we're on episode 2, and we're going through right now a sermon series focused on evangelism, and we're calling it Reach 1, with 1 being an acronym for our neighbors everywhere. And if you were with us last week, we talked about reaching those around where we live, and this week is talking about where you work. But before we get into that, this has kind of been a tough few days in the world of Christianity, especially in apologetics, and if you keep up with any of that. A prominent ministry just having some problems right now, really substantial. I don't even know if problems does it justice, but just some sad news out of that. And as we talked this morning, it was just an interesting thing of how important it is for us to maintain or basically practice what we preach or maintain our moral compass because of the way the outside world is looking at us. It's saddening for the ministry.
It is.
As a whole, but it does damage to our ability to go out and speak to people. It's a saddening, it's a hurtful thing. It's a sad day just in the world of evangelism, because it's sometimes hard enough to live as a Christian, but then you add something like this in, especially for somebody so prominent, that was a popular voice, and I think it speaks to the responsibility you have.
It does, and when we damage our witness with any kind of obvious sin, it just takes away that chance we have to talk to people about Christ. So if you're in your job and you're stealing money or treating people poorly, in a sense, you might as well not even talk to anyone about the Lord, because it's counterproductive.
Right.
Now, that's not to say you have to be perfect. The line is, I don't know. But when you're an obvious sin and things like that, especially of a prominent, it makes me think back to the 80s with the two there, but of a prominent person, that does more damage to Christianity because it gives our enemy ammunition.
Oh, yeah.
And so people will say, well, what about that person? And, we can't really defend that.
Yeah.
So it gives them ammunition to use against that witness.
I think I've been telling you this book I've been listening to called Jesus and John Wayne. And it's been a frustrating book to listen to because the author picks up on all these, for lack of a better term, these Christians behaving badly, right? And she picks up on them and paints this broad stroke over all of Christianity, and especially our style of practice, that really makes us all look bad. And it's I've got my problems with the book, but I think what it does again is it shows us this is the outside view of people. And they're just, this is just another nail and for some people, something like this could be what keeps them away from ever coming to an understanding of who Jesus is, ever coming to the Lord, and really that, and which is tragic because it has eternal, what's the word I'm looking for? Implications, right? It's got eternal implications.
Right.
Because of, and so you think about, especially as we think about as leaders in the Christian world, and that there's a huge responsibility. And as you take that journey down your faith, and you start flying that Jesus flag more and more to people, they're going to expect that. I saw it with, I worked in the banking world for a while, and if you look at the first part of my career versus the second part, and when Jesus really entered my life, when I say I became a Christian, like a fully devoted Christian, I had a lot of damage repair to do because of how I'd lived that first. And there were people that I know still to this day, probably even with the role that I hold now, probably don't even think it's real. They're like, yeah, I just remember this guy from these actions. Right. And that's something that, that I think we have to live with, because you can do damage to your witness, but also to people in general.
Yeah, and it's kind of the society that we live in now makes it worse, because a few cops do terrible things, and all of a sudden all cops are bad. And whether it's the sexual scandals that happened a couple of years ago, right? That all of a sudden all Catholic priests are bad. Well, that's not true. I mean, that's still just a small amount, but I think the same thing happens here. So everybody gets painted with this broad brush. Right. So, and that's on a national scale, but even locally that happens when you work with a Christian that's a hypocrite, you suddenly hate all Christians or think all Christians are hypocrites. It's not true. It's not even close to true. Right. But that's just the reality of it. Right. And that's why it's so important, the way we behave at work and outside of work, if we want to impact those people for Christ. Well, like Jesus told us to. So we should want to impact them for Christ.
And we're up against a lot, because you even think about just going through our current stage with COVID. Right, it's amplified because even you guys are holding services, so you don't care about people. Right, or it's you didn't do this, so you don't care about people. It's far too dangerous, and that one I get a kick out of when it's, well, we can't do this because okay, it was cold out last night, but go tell the person sitting in China or another country that's closed off to Christianity that's dangerous. I think we kind of talked about it kind of being soft a little bit. I know we hit on that last week, but we've already got stuff stacked against us. The enemy does a really good job, and it's not even that it's bad people. It's the enemy. It's Satan that's lining those things up. Right. And so we need to watch those things. But what I really liked about this week, and we got into talking about where we work. And the first thing, just right out of the gate with this idea, is there's a statement there about love where you work. And not just like love the place you work or love the job you have. And if you're fortunate enough to be a person that does what they love to do, that's an awesome gift. That's a really cool thing. But it's the action of actively loving the people around you at the place you work. Right. And that was a really important thing, because if you're actively loving, you're doing certain things, right, with those people. Right. Even the difficult ones.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned too that love is a verb. It is something that you have to do. So it's not just a matter of a warm fuzzy, or you send them a card, or put something on Facebook on their birthday, but that you actually treat them like somebody that you love, and to do that whether they're a believer or not, and no preferential treatment there based on whether they're a believer or not. So to show that love to them that is different than what they see from others helps a lot. Because a lot of times we create a standard among Christians that really the world does. I mean, because you think, well, if I'm a nice guy, but there's people who aren't Christians that are nice guys. There are people who aren't Christians who won't steal from you, or lie to you. So so the bar's pretty low when that's what it is. You have to go a little beyond that to look for the extra that we can do in those opportunities that Paul talked about in Colossians, and making the most of them.
Right. I think you bring up, that's an interesting topic you bring up, because we talk about that even quite a bit, about the low bar, and just the way, Jesus really raised the bar. That was a lot of his teaching, even through like the Sermon on the Mount and some of his other things, of he's saying, here's your law, this law, that's really a low bar. Like murdering, don't murder somebody. I can make it all day, right? We've talked about this, but to not mock or to not speak ill of somebody, can sometimes, especially at work, when emotions get high, there can be stressful situations. There can be all kinds of things that happen that cause you to want to treat somebody. But we're called to a higher standard, and to love, Jesus, again, we'll go back to love your enemies.
Right.
That was so reverse of what the culture was. That was very countercultural back in their day. Yeah.
But you bring up a good point, because if you think about it, even tying in what you said with what I said, when you say you shall not murder, when you have that commandment, the vast majority of non-Christian people never murder anyone. So that's a pretty low bar.
Yeah.
But when you say don't hate your enemy, then that's a separating issue.
Yeah.
Because for people who aren't Christians, to dislike someone or to want to get revenge on someone's no big deal. In fact, that's kind of natural. And so that's when it raises a bar that separates Christians from non-Christian people.
Okay.
And kind of makes it that way. And
so
if we just don't do bad things, that's not enough. We have to go a little farther than that in doing what's good and pleasing to God too.
Absolutely. So speak about like how we as Christians, how we act at work and loving people where we work at. One of the things that comes out early, we're looking at Colossians 3, kind of the end of Colossians 3, beginning of Colossians 4. And I know you had jobs in high school and college and did that before you entered ministry. And I've got my work experience. But you ever run into that person, or maybe you were this person at times, that you only worked when someone was around?
I hope I was never that person. There was probably days where I was, but I know there were those people.
Yeah.
And what was really bad is that when you'd have somebody that would go the extra mile when he was looking, or he or she was looking, and then they didn't do anything when they weren't. Right. And so they were trying to make themselves not only look good, but look better than everybody else.
Yeah.
And I've run into a few of those.
Yeah, it's funny. Sure. Even just being a teenager, I remember spent a summer painting houses, and there were a lot of afternoons where we just kind of call it about an hour early. It was hot, we were tired, and one of the guys, we just like lean up on his car and take it. But then, you'd see the boss's truck come around the corner or something. All of a sudden you look like you're just getting something out and running back to work. And so, but it leads to an interesting thing there, because it's easy to only work when someone's looking. It's kind of almost like what Jesus talked about, don't just, don't just forgive somebody when they've forgiven you. I just lost that there, right? Don't just do it when someone's looking or expecting it, because even the sinners and tax collectors do that, right?
Right.
But it's this idea of character. We talk about character as being who you are when no one's looking,
right?
Or what you do when no one's looking, and that's super important when it comes to loving people where you work.
It is. Yeah, because I've got to confess here, part of why I keep my door open in my office is just because it's easier to talk to the ones in the next office as part of it, but also so there's an accountability there. People can walk in at any time. And I got to admit, when you guys are out of the building, it's a little easier to goof off and not do anything, because I know nobody's going to walk in my office. And there are times, where that might happen, where I, just not doing much productive during that time. Right. And that counts. I mean, that's kind of what he's talking about there. He's not just talking about a person, but just in general. Yeah. If you're slacking off just because nobody's looking, that's not pleasing to God.
So you don't leave your door open as just an open invitation for me to come and drink my coffee. And I just thought it was like an open invitation.
Well, I can tell you that Scott, my sermon writing partner, and I talk about you and Matt somewhat, because Matt's the same way. He comes in and he'll talk for quite a while, although I think he's a lot worse than you. He'll stay like half the day.
I thought you were going to talk about how great of a guy he was if he was that much.
He's a great guy. He's a great guy.
Yeah,
that's not meant to be a criticism that way. So just likes to talk. Very, very much a people person like you are.
Yeah, I enjoy.
So
do enjoy that.
Yeah.
And one of those, keeping up with that idea of working when no one's watching, right, is understanding who we're really serving. Because it's time, you think about it as a teacher, well, I'm working for the principal or the school district, or even I'm working on behalf of these kids, right? If you're teaching school or, an accountant or someone at the grocery store, or a lawyer or a car mechanic, right? We all have a boss and a customer that we're working for, but that's not ultimately who we're working and serving.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting because when you live that way, it actually makes your job a little better because your attitude toward it has an effect on your enjoyment. Like the illustration that I gave of the guy that cleaned out porta potties.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a much more miserable job than that. But yet, once you change that attitude on who you're working for, you actually enjoy your job more, it's just one of those things where when you do it the way the New Testament teaches, it works a little better. You know, it actually, even if you're not a Christian, if you start seeing it that way of, I'm just going to do this because, you know, I'm working for somebody else. I'm not going to pay attention to them.
Yeah.
It's going to make your attitude better for the job. We shouldn't be so surprised by it, but the New Testament works.
Yeah, I know.
When you apply those principles, it works.
We probably should mention when we say you're workers that you're working for Jesus. We should probably clarify.
Yeah, well, but I was saying for somebody who's not a Christian, you could even if you said, "Well, I'm working for a higher power," you would probably enjoy your job more. But certainly, it's better. We want it to be Christ because He's the higher power.
I realized before you started talking, I never said like we're working for Jesus. So it was more.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to clarify that's of course what we're talking about. But yeah, it almost adds if you can do it with humility. It's working with humility, or again going back to the popular idea of it's not about me.
Right.
This isn't about me, right? My job, if you view it as, you view your job as a gift, and you view your work as a gift, which even you can go through the Old and the New Testament, and there are scriptures that lead that work's a gift from God. I mean, when He set up Adam in the garden. Right?
Yeah.
He commanded him to work and keep. Those are the two things He told him: work and keep. So work the ground and keep it growing. So from the very beginning, it was given.
It was, and I think what we tend to forget there is work was not the curse. Sometimes people think that the curse on him for his sin was that he had to work. No, it was the curse was that his work would be more difficult.
Yes.
But he was assigned a task in the garden right from the beginning. Yeah. So he was working. I think even to some extent part of his job was naming the animals, which would be kind of cool, but kind of fun. But I think it'd probably get boring after a while too. There's a lot. So I don't know how far that went, but there's a lot. Animals. And we get confused on that because we think, well, I don't like to work, and go back to Adam, work's the curse. No, work's not the curse. Weeds were the curse. Right. So the difficulty of work is the curse of sin, not work itself.
And if we're serving Jesus, then that we're just kind of following what He wrote here through the end of Colossians. And He talked about paying attention. Pay attention and be devoted for prayer, but pay attention to those people around you, because you do have people that'll give you, even if they don't know, but they'll give you clues, they'll give you ends to be able to love them. There's a preacher out in Las Vegas that has a church on the Strip, and before that he was in Virginia Beach. And he wrote a book before he moved. I think it was before he moved. But it was called Guerrilla Lover. And the church he was leading, a friend of mine was in his church at that time, and they talked about, it was guerrilla warfare, but they talked about guerrilla love, right? And so they would go on these basically secret missions to go out and love people without them knowing, right? And they'd leave gifts, they'd do stuff like... And I don't know all of it. There was something about like cleaning up a yard at night when the people would have no idea who did it, and they disappeared in the morning. The yard was all cleaned up. And at one point, I think they did put somebody in a gorilla suit on stage to model guerrilla love. But they had this whole thing of, we're really, and they almost took it from a militaristic standpoint, but it was to go out and love people, but do it in a way that was that glorified God and not themselves.
Yeah.
And I think if we're paying attention, so they had to pay attention to the needs of the people around them. And if we're in a work office, people are going to tell you things.
Right.
Like, oh, man, I don't want to go home tonight because all we're going to do is fight.
That's a big clue.
That's a huge clue, right? Or somebody that talks about, I just feel no purpose in life, or, they lack hope. They lack these things. They'll give you ends. To pay attention to.
And that's not only, some comments like that aren't only an end right then, and I think we should take them then, but that deserves a follow-up too.
Yeah,
if he says, I hate to go home because all we do is fight.
Right.
At that point, maybe the only thing you can say is, I didn't know that, and I'm sorry. I'm going to be praying for you.
Right.
But then you follow up with that as well. Another thing that I want to go back to that you were saying is it is important to take yourself out of the equation, because if you talk about working for the Lord and you have this idea of, I'm kind of high and mighty because I don't work for him, I work for Jesus. And sometimes not many people would have that happen, but some could. And when you do that, then it's actually counterproductive. So make sure that you're working for the Lord in a sense in silence. And then if somebody asks, how come the rest of us take long breaks, how come you don't? You can say it's because I'm a Christian and I feel like I'm working for the Lord, and he always sees it. Because that makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, bringing this back to like a ministry point of view, and I think it might have been you I heard say this once, but it talks about ministry exposes lazy people and workaholics. And because it's very easy sometimes in the church world, you talked about that, it's really kind of easy to just goof off and do that if you wanted to.
It's easy in ministry to do either of those. I don't know why, and maybe every job's that way, but it's very, you can be either of those pretty easily in ministry, and I've seen guys that are both.
But even getting outside of ministry into other areas of work, both of those are damaging. The workaholic can be damaging to your witness as well.
It can be,
especially if you're driving, if you manage people. And you've got those tendencies and you're driving people and you're not being very Christ-like to your employees. And again, we talked about the importance of leadership kind of at the beginning of this thing. If you're in management, being Christ-like, I would say is even more important, because you have sway and pull over these people. And now maybe it's an added responsibility from God that if you're in a management position over people, he's giving you even a greater responsibility for those people, because you hold a sense of leverage, if that's the right word.
And I think to some degree, and maybe this is a stretch, but I think to some degree you can stand out more, because I think the average person kind of expects their boss to be a jerk. That we think that's to be expected. Like we talked about in the message, that I'm not going to like my boss because he tells me what to do. And so there's a certain level that's expected. So when you go beyond that and you show the love of Christ, I think it can even make more of a difference, because the expectation is so low. That it makes them see, okay, so why? I mean, this guy doesn't have to be kind to me. Why is he doing that? Why are they treating me this way when that's not normally what you would expect? So I think in some level, I mean, with workers it does too, because there's plenty of workers that disobey the things on there. But with a person in management, I think it gives us a unique opportunity to love people.
So then Paul ends this. He talks about, making sure our conversations are full of grace and seasoned with salt, and, we know we're ready to answer to anyone. And that's such an important thing. I think sometimes we get ourselves, and Peter kind of said that too, have an answer for anyone who asks you the reason for your hope, right? And sometimes I think we get so wrapped up in, okay, I got to have an answer and I got to be ready to just put the nail in the coffin or have just the best thing to say, or I can defeat any argument, right? And so we're so focused on having that answer that we almost neglect the first part of that, of making sure they're full of grace and they're seasoned with salt. Because if we're harsh and nasty with people, or we have an overly judgmental attitude that turns them off, and that it doesn't matter what we have to say, they're going to tune out and not listen.
And part of what helps with that too is it says have, the idea is to have an answer, not the answer. And I think sometimes we expect of ourselves to have the answer. Sometimes a great answer can be, I don't know, but I'll find out. Because there's some tough questions that non-Christians have, and it's perfectly okay to say, I don't know. In fact, that's a lot better than winging it and them realizing you're just babbling and you don't know what you're talking about. But to say, I don't know, but I'll find out and get back with you, that's a fantastic answer. Because that has some honesty to it, but it also has some caring, because you're going to take some time to find it. Now, when you say that, find the answer and go back to them. But to say that, there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't have to be the answer. It just has to be an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And he says, be wise how you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. And, it's really easy. We can get caught in this sometimes of, around our Christian friends, we make sure to keep up the front and make sure that they see us. And sometimes we'll let down our guard because we feel maybe the pressure's less for whatever reason. Maybe we get around non-Christian people and, oh man, I don't have to act like that anymore. That's almost like the reverse of what we should be thinking. Like the outside world, that we should be far more cognizant of or aware of how we act and how we portray ourselves.
Yeah.
Because it's going to have ramifications. Again, back to what we talked about at the beginning. Christians, guys like you and me, we're going to look at what happened in that ministry and think, man, that's tragic, that's awful, but it's not going to affect my faith in Jesus, right?
Right.
I mean, the people had
a
terrible fault, right? It's not his fault.
Yeah.
But for somebody else, I mean, that could be huge. And there, because that's
I think for some it will be huge.
Right. It's a prominent name. It's somebody.
Yeah.
Again, if you're going to get out and fly that flag,
right.
One, be ready for the enemy to attack, but two, be checking yourself, keep yourself accountable. That's the biggest thing. Life without accountability is terrible.
Right.
I mean, when you can just on a whim satisfy every passing fancy, it leads to a pretty terrible life. I mean, an undisciplined life is not.
Yeah.
Is not. I mean, at the time, this is again another kind of popular Christian axiom, but sin is a lot of fun for a while.
Yeah.
And it's almost kind of like just, I think about for just a simplicity thing, eating can be kind of that way, right? It might be a blast to hit pizza buffet all week long, every meal, right?
I think it would be a blast to do that, but no question.
Come Saturday, when you can't get out of bed, I mean, it's going to catch up to you. It might be fun for a little while.
Right.
But not having that discipline, not having the accountability of a good friend who will tell you, hey, this is 3 days in a row you've been doing that. Yeah. You might want to knock it off.
That's right. And we even talked about this at the beginning, too, or before we started this podcast, that it's important, too, to know that with your conversation being full of grace, to make sure it's not gossip.
Yes.
And so even talking, we had a conversation of how can we talk about this without it being gossip?
Right.
And that's tough to do. And I can't say I know what the line is, but to make sure that you're being very careful.
Absolutely.
Because other people, even though they may not, most people that aren't Christians don't think gossip is a sin. Right. So they may not see it that way. But when you don't gossip, that can show up more.
Yeah.
And if you do gossip all the time, even though maybe they don't think that's a sin, they will see you as just being the same as them.
Right.
And so that damages your witness too, even if you're gossiping about the person who damaged their witness, which is kind of ironic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
But just to make sure that, when he talks about our conversation is full of grace.
Yeah.
To not have gossip. I think when you don't complain, because we're supposed to do everything without grumbling or complaining as well.
Okay.
When you don't criticize, I think those things go a long ways in helping people see Christianity in a positive light.
Absolutely.
And to see the difference that Jesus makes in a positive light.
Yeah. So as we land the plane here on this one, and we kind of wrap up our time, there's a whole lot, because I think if you're sitting in your job right now, it may seem really daunting. Well, how can I reach people where I work, or how can I reach one person where I'm working? So what's one practical step to take this week? Like as we wrap up, what's one step somebody could take this week to reach somebody where they work? One simple, effective step.
Well, the kind of default Sunday school answer would be to pray. I think it has to start there, but let's go one beyond that.
Yeah.
And I think one beyond that would be to just do something nice for a person. And it might be bringing them candy, or it might be if you're going out for lunch saying, hey, I'm going out for lunch, you want me to bring you something back? Or just talking, just trying to be, and maybe that's, just, we don't want to just be nice Christians. It has to be more than that. But
it's an end.
Off the spur of the moment, that's what I thought about. What would you say?
Well, I think I just heard you offer to buy me lunch for someday this week, but I'm not positive. Yeah, I think that one action, I was I was really thinking about just watching the way we talk, that whole idea of our conversations.
Yeah, that'd
and
be,
just
that'd be a good
really,
one.
really checking what comes out of your mouth throughout
Right.
the week and the way you treat people.
Yeah.
So
I tell you, if you use bad language, as hard as that is to stop, when you stop, people are going to notice.
Oh, right.
And so that'd be one thing that would be good. And just to say, I'm a follower of Christ.
Right.
And I realized, even if you've been saying that as a follower of Christ, just say, I realized that I shouldn't do that, so I'm trying to stop.
yeah.
That would be impactful because people notice
Yeah.
when you stop that. That's
Yeah,
for
they do.
sure.
Okay. So there's a couple things you could do.
Right.
If you're thinking about, well, what step can I take? And that's really what we want to look at, is just what are those little steps, because you keep taking those little steps and it adds up
Right.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
So
And inviting them to church is another thing.
Absolutely.
That's a I want to say easy thing to do, but it can be tough too.
Yeah.
But
It's simple.
It's simple.
Right. Not
Yeah,
always easy, but
something
it's
we can
simple.
do too.
Absolutely.
Because on the workplace, especially now, our
Yeah.
society has made us feel like if you work in a secular job, you
Right.
can't talk about Christ.
Right.
And so we have to take that in account and just be a little more strategic
Yep.
about how we do that
Absolutely.
and how we talk about that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think it's probably time. We're hitting right up about 30 minutes. I know we talked about keeping these at about 30, so probably
Yeah,
good time
and
to wrap it
one
up.
one thing we should mention too is that we've got that class on baptism coming
Yeah.
up on the 28th, so it'd be a week from Sunday.
Yep.
And it'll be offered during both services
Yep.
back in room 1 on Main Street. And then the next Sunday, March 7th, is going to be Baptism Sunday. We're going to
Yeah.
preach on it, and then hopefully we'll have some baptisms
Right.
with that too. So kind of is preparation for that. And that's for all ages,
Yeah.
kids, adults, because we'll make sure to answer their questions
Yeah.
and we'll do it that way. So I don't want the adults to stay away because there might be some kids there and it might seem too simplistic, but I think it'd be good to have a little of
absolutely.
everything there.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll have to do one of these on baptism here before that Sunday. Do a podcast on baptism.
Yeah, we might have to. Have to.
All right.
Yeah. Although we've got these planned out months and ahead.
Yeah, we do.
Months
Yeah.
ahead, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. We're gonna
Weeks
survive.
ahead,
Weeks
minutes
I
ahead,
think so.
seconds ahead.
So, all right. Well, hey, thanks for joining us. And,
Yeah.
we'll be back next week. So, again, if you can, leave comments. If you got any questions or anything, shoot us a message.
Absolutely.
And we'd love to hear from you. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, signing off, and have a great week.
Yeah, thanks for joining
See you
us.
guys.